Our campaign to see homelessness ended by 2040 is absolutely vital. As the next election in Scotland hots up, we need people to compete for the best solutions to homelessness that can achieve that aim by 2040, because without it, we'll see more and more people suffering and so much potential loss to homelessness. So we need to see action in this election.
We'd like to work with all political parties in the next parliamentary term to develop a route map of how to get there. But right now, we just want to make sure that every political party has that commitment and shares that same aspiration that we want to end it, and we want to end it for good.
We need a long-term approach to end homelessness for good. We can't stay stuck in crisis management. We need to have that long-term focus, that long-term vision, and that long-term delivery plan. And that's why we're asking for work to be undertaken across 3 parliamentary terms, so that we can end homelessness for good.
The one word I would associate with homelessness is fear, because I associate my own house as a place of safety. It's a place that I can go to and feel safe. And if you don't have that, I suspect you would be frightened.
If I had to think of one word when thinking about homelessness, I think it's scandalous. I think a country like Scotland, with all the talent, resources and ambition that we have, the fact that we have 10,000 children homeless in Scotland right now is unforgivable.
So the one word I associate with homelessness is sadness. This happens across all walks of life, across all classes of life. But everybody has got their own story, and it tends to be a sad story. And quite often it's a story that those people would never envisage them being in this situation.
Moral outrage, I think that sums it up entirely.
Preventable. I think that's the one that resonates with me. Homelessness is an absolute tragedy in Scotland, and it needs to be eradicated.
Unfairness. I think it's unfair that people are still experiencing homelessness. Homelessness is a political choice, and we need to make sure that we do everything in our power to make sure that no one is experiencing homelessness by the time we get to 2040, and we fully support that ask.
Yes, I believe homelessness can be solved, but it has to be seen within the context of solving wider social and economic problems that affect the individuals who are homeless. I won't eradicate child poverty if I don't improve the housing situation of children and families in our country.
I think homelessness in Scotland can be ended, and I think it can be, but it will take a decade or slightly more. I think anyone that pretends that there is a magic trick that can be done and overnight we can end homelessness, I just don't think they'd be telling you the truth. I think we can very quickly though end rough sleeping and then do the structural changes we need to make in order to end homelessness.
We should be thinking about doing this certainly in a generation, whatever that means, right? And what to me, the key to this is getting our economy going in Scotland, and especially getting our economy going in our local towns and cities, and not just in the big cities. I'm just very conscious and to say that Reform UK does not believe the answer to all these problems is a cheque from central government. I'd rather see housing policy and economy being prioritised by councils over all the other ideological things they're doing. And if there was some political will in that and then get joined up between central government and local government, we can fix it.
I think there's a moral imperative to end homelessness in Scotland, absolutely. And I think that the sooner the better. I mean, obviously, Crisis has this very admirable target of 2040. My anxiety about putting a date on it is that governments will back-end decision-making if there's a target somewhere in the distant future when we need to take action right now.
So I'm not sure where the date of 2040 to eradicate homelessness has come from. I don't know if that's a date that is a target of the Crisis charity, but it sounds reasonable. If anything, I'd like to think that we could perhaps be more ambitious than that.
I believe that homelessness can be ended in Scotland, and I believe we can do it by 2040. Homelessness and the fact that we still have people who are homeless is a political choice. We need to be investing in more social homes and building more social homes to make sure that people have that long-term stability for them.
let's get more houses built. Let's try and increase supply for the huge amount of demand. We need a house building strategy that looks at where the homes are needed for today and for decades down the line. We need to encourage the building industry with the incentive to build in brownfield sites, to build in places where there's a need for homes, and to make it affordable.
Easier to greenlight planning decisions. Now, that's not taking democratic accountability out of planning, but it just means that things happen faster, that those are not held up by red tape. But it's also, again, about addressing, in terms of the medium to long term, the root causes of homelessness: poverty, trauma, drug and alcohol misuse, the link between imprisonment and homelessness, domestic abuse and homelessness.
It's not just getting a bed for the night, but it's getting action around a longer term solution and getting access to a community of people who care and getting into an ecosystem that begins to help you rebuild. We need working families living in working towns, in town centres, going to local schools, having local jobs. If we can get the local economy working and then we can get the local housing stock sorted, we can create the pathway. What is it you need in life? You need a job and you need a home.
We've got to fix the immediate mess, and that means ending rough sleeping, partly through proper funding, partly through partnership, and bringing civic society together so we can end rough sleeping immediately. It's also going to mean in the medium term, ensuring we have proper reform of our planning system, proper investment through the Housing Investment Bank, through the development trusts we want to create so we can ramp up house building across the country. And it's also going to mean in the long term, making sure we deliver on that promise of 125,000 new homes over the course of the next Parliament.
And one of the things I've set out to make sure that we can have a long-term approach to tackling homelessness is to have a long-term housing investment budget. So we've said over the next 5 years, we'll invest up to £4.9 billion. So the sector knows the government is working with it to tackle issues around housing supply.
We need to be investing in more social homes and building more social homes to make sure that people have that place to call their own. We need to make sure that we're supporting people out of homelessness. We're giving councils the ability to bring vacant and derelict properties back into use, make sure that they are good quality of homes as well, and investing in them to make sure that people have that long-term stability for them.
It's not just about building houses, although building houses would contribute towards tackling homelessness. It's also about supporting people to overcome some of the challenges and difficulties they face in life. And it's about making sure that people have the underlying capability to participate in our society and to be able to be employed within our society. And that really is the focus of my policy agenda. It's about working with people to get them to a better place, to overcome poverty, overcome homelessness, overcome addiction. And it's about the state operating with all of its resources to support people, and we must surely be able to do that.
But we need to address it in the round with all of these other negative social issues. I think that homelessness is such a problem in Scotland in 2026, in large part because we have a deficiency in supply, of course. We aren't building enough homes, and what homes we do have are not affordable or available to people who need them. But it's also linked again to other negative social issues that Scotland have. We have a particularly Scottish problem in terms of our relationship with substance use. But it's also, again, about addressing, in terms of the medium to long term, the root causes of homelessness: poverty, trauma, drug and alcohol misuse, the link between imprisonment and homelessness, domestic abuse and homelessness. So we can't just look at this, as I keep saying, as a deficiency in supply. We need to look at it in the round.
So it's absolutely critical when any one of us could find ourselves in a position of homelessness. That's the reality. And when that happens, and if that happens, then there should be the support services, whether that's support from the state in terms of advice and benefits and the provision of emergency accommodation, short-term emergency accommodation. But I do know also that Crisis Scotland do incredible work in supporting people who find themselves in this predicament. So obviously we shouldn't actually need a charity like Crisis, and I know that the mission statement is eventually not to have to exist because there will not be any homelessness, and that is something that we are all determined to work together to fix. Homelessness doesn't exist in a vacuum. Fundamental to fixing the problem is employment. It's about reducing homelessness by ensuring people have got well-paid, stable, consistent jobs, reliable sources of employment.
We need to make sure that we're investing in things like Housing First, to make sure that we do that wraparound support for everyone, to make sure that whatever that barrier is and whatever else they're experiencing as well as homelessness is tackled, to make sure that we support that whole person approach. And in the long term, making sure that we are monitoring and tackling any other reasons why people may become homeless. I think building the homes and saying job done isn't enough. We need to keep an eye on what is coming up and making sure that we tackle any other issues as they come forward.
It's a big priority because fundamentally people cannot get on with their lives and be contributors to our society if they don't have security about their housing. So I know how I would feel if I was not secure in my own house. I know where I'm going home to every night. I've got that certainty. If you don't have that certainty, I imagine that must be totally destabilising for individuals. So if I want to lead a prosperous and a safe Scotland, and a prosperous and safe Scotland has to mean that people have got to have good, secure housing, because that's the foundation of life.
Ending homelessness is absolutely a cross-portfolio issue. I don't think you can just deliver it through the housing portfolio alone. I think we need to take that cross-government approach and actually look at it in a cross-parliament approach as well. I think too often we've sat on individual committees and said, no, that's a housing portfolio issue, when in actual fact, we know the issues from a health committee point of view, this session and how it impacts across the piece.
I see this as part of an ecosystem where I want communities to be happy, healthy and wealthy. People who are sleeping on the streets is not a healthy and happy community, especially when we know that there's a lot of talent in that community that can be used. For me, it's about getting the economy moving. I don't see homelessness just purely as one thing to solve. I see it as part of a wider issue of making a community work.
It has to be one of the top 5 priorities for the new government after the election. Because again, I go back to the point about social and economic policy. Housing is the great bridge that can grow the economy, create good jobs, and also improve people's social conditions. And it also is a great link that lifts people out of poverty, gives them economic opportunity, gives them safety and security in their own home and their own community, and allows everybody to thrive. And so housing is absolutely crucial to that. It has to be a key priority and a key challenge for our country. If you want to end poverty, if you want to deliver economic prosperity, you don't do it by having 10,000 children homeless. You do it by making sure everyone has a home to call their own.
Well, I think homelessness is like an overarching aim for my party, and it is critical because I think that we can't really look ourselves in the mirror as a nation and think that we are doing well for as long as people are sleeping rough, for as long as tens of thousands of Scottish kids are not in stable accommodation.
We're looking at the manifesto in the round. We've got a team who are responsible for housing and house building and all these associated issues. And yes, I can say quite confidently, it is our sentiment. We agree with the sentiment that we should end homelessness by 2040.
Ending homelessness is a big priority for our party. Housing is a human right, and making sure that people have a good, warm home to call their own should be a basic for everyone. So making sure that we have that for everyone, and the knock-on effect for mental well-being, for people's health, for people's job prospects and things like that as well is massive. And making sure that we link all of those together across government, I think, is something we maybe haven't done well enough so far. So ending homelessness is a huge priority and something we need to see ended by 2040.
Be very focused is what I would say to myself. Be very, very focused on achieving an objective, and in this case, eradicating homelessness would be an absolutely legitimate objective to take forward. So be very focused about that and make sure government is aligned around about doing that.
If you look back to 2012, can we look ourselves in the eye and say that given all the great things in our country, given the powers we have, the resources we have, the talent we have, the ideas we have, is this the best we could have done in the last 14 years for our citizens? And I think the honest answer to that is no, it's not. This doesn't have to be as good as it gets. And if we're going to do anything, it has to be ending homelessness, it has to be ending rough sleeping, and it has to make sure that every young person has a home to call their own.
I think since becoming a politician, I've understood better the difficulties around the housing market, both rental and house building, and of course the pressures on resources. But this is a blight on society, and I do think that we can do so much better.
Back in 2012, I wasn't even involved in politics. So I think, probably thinking back to the start of this session, I think we need to make sure that we're tackling these things quickly. The impact of inappropriate temporary accommodation, for example, on children and young people, and the impact on their schooling and things like that, a lot of that can be quite detrimental quite quickly. And over the course of 5 years, that's a long time in terms of children and young people's progress through not just primary school but high school and things like that as well, and the impact on their future. So I think one of the things I would probably say to everyone is that we can't waste any more time, and 2040 is the goal, but if we can achieve it before then, we should, because the harm reduction to everyone is huge.
Before politics, I was a youth worker. I was working with Fairbridge initially and then Abelara. I did a lot of work with looked after children in particular and care experienced young people. Now at the time, the kind of normal age for leaving care was 16, so people were leaving either foster care or residential care just at a time when their peer group were sitting life qualifying exams. They were given their possessions in a bin bag and usually presented as homeless to the council, ended up in temporary accommodation in B&Bs or in really inappropriate tenancies. The charities I worked with supported them, and we saw, helping them find routes into training and employment, and then by extension into more stable tenures of property. The difference that made to those young lives was transformational. Just having the stability, having neighbours that became their friends, and the sort of certainty of a roof over their head, a warm home, a quality home. That isn't the case for everybody, and I think particularly for the looked after population, and care experience population, and for our prison leavers as well. And a lot of these people are the same people, because there's a lot of crossover there as well. That stable home is the route to a transformational life.
I think it's one of the best things that we could do to make sure no generation goes through what my generation went through, because I rubbed shoulders with my peers at school who were living in poverty. I had an ordinary upbringing, but I didn't live in poverty. But I rubbed shoulders with plenty of people who did, and that was a while ago. And other generations, and we have generations just now living through that. And I want to end that once and for all and get Scotland on strong foundations.
Homelessness can happen to anyone. It could be family breakdown. It could be relationship breakdown. It could be a loss of a job. It could be a mental health issue or a physical health issue. But I can see it in my own children's faces when they see people sleeping rough on our streets, and they look at me and they know I'm in politics and say, how is we as a country letting this happen? And I know it makes them question what politics is all about, what Parliament's all about, what governments are all about, if that's what we're willing to accept and what we're willing to tolerate. And I'm not willing to accept and tolerate that any young person, whether it be my kids or anyone else's, is seeing rough sleeping in our streets, thinking that's acceptable, or seeing 10,000 children homeless, not having a home to call their own. That's not acceptable.
We're all familiar with the sights in city centres. I live in Glasgow and I work in Edinburgh, and I see it regularly, people sleeping on the streets. It's absolutely tragic, but of course that isn't the definition of homelessness. I think so many people labour under the misapprehension that that's what homelessness means, but it really isn't as simple as that. There are so many people who find themselves without a place to live. They're in temporary accommodation and they're struggling. They cannot get out of it. They're trapped in this world of homelessness. And that's why the invisible part of it is something that we need to talk about a lot more, and to sort of slightly challenge or demolish that stereotype that it's just people perhaps with addiction issues or relating to drugs or alcohol. You know, each and every one of us should know that, you know, even when I was younger and I was paying a rent, and I knew if I lost my job, I'd be 2-3 wages away from not being able to pay that rent. That's the reality. And with the rents being what they are nowadays, you know, it causes you to think that it could happen to anyone. And that's something that's why it's so critically important that we do everything we possibly can to eradicate homelessness.
I think one of the things for me in the course of this session, speaking to people about homelessness that has stood out, is the hidden forms of homelessness. People staying on couches, staying with friends, and moving around different family members and friends that might not be in that, what we see as that conventional type of homelessness that everybody thinks about and everybody associates with. And quite often that's younger people, and they're kind of hidden in some of the statistics quite often, but the impact on them not having that permanent address, being able to access health services, being able to access a whole load of things is quite stark. And I think the impact on their health, on their well-being, on their prospects going forward, and their ability to get back into a form of housing themselves is really stark. And you can see how much they want that place to call home, like many of us take for granted. And I think they're the people that are always in the back of my mind as to how we support them into a permanent home of their own.
Just as a connection to me that people who'd served in the armed forces seem to be a disproportionate number of people who are homeless. And yet they have been in a disciplined environment. They have been in a high performance environment. By definition, that makes them high achievers. And yet they've found it difficult to come back into society. And to me, that is something that's an example of somebody who's actually capable, who shouldn't be in that situation.
If I've got a mission at the heart of what I'm doing, my political agenda, to eradicate child poverty, tackling homelessness is an integral part of that. I can't eradicate child poverty without tackling homelessness. We should work to do that.
I think we've said quite often previously that we back Crisis's campaign to end homelessness by 2040, and we will certainly continue to commit to that in the next session and work across Parliament and across portfolios to make sure that that is a reality.
Well, we've launched our manifesto, and a key part of that is to get, as I say, to get our towns full of hustle and bustle again, full of working people, full of a combination of families, workers, pensioners, having a healthy environment, having people working and living in town centres, and therefore housing is absolutely key to this. So happy to work with anybody on that basis. Societies and organisations like yours, you're at the coalface, you actually understand what is going on. I'd far rather work direct with people like you. So yes, I would be very happy to work on a roadmap with you.
Well, certainly. I mean, in respect of the crisis, we support the crisis campaign. I'm anxious about putting an artificial timeline on the date by which we want to end homelessness. And the reason for that is, I think if you say to the Scottish Government, you need to do this by 2040, they'll wait to 2039 before they actually do anything about it. We've seen that with the climate change target. So you might not see us explicitly say the 2040 commitment, and that's because we don't want to push those decisions down the road. We need to start tackling these issues right now. That's supply, that's the relationship with poverty, the issues around substance use, and imprisonment, domestic abuse, all of these things that feed into the homelessness crisis. This is happening right now. We can't give the Scottish Government, whoever that is in the next Parliament, the latitude just to say, okay, well, we can put off decision making until the late 2030s.
Yes, I can say quite confidently, it is our sentiment. We would like to see, we agree with the sentiment that we should end homelessness by 2040, hopefully even sooner.
You are going to be very pleased, very happy, and very positive about our manifesto, because I'm being really clear about what I think the 5 priority areas are for Scotland. And one of those 5 priority areas has to be addressing the housing emergency. It has to be building 125,000 new homes in the next Parliament. It has to be ending rough sleeping once and for all. It has to be making sure we don't have 10,000 children homeless in our country. And it has to be the next Parliament taking a giant leap in that ambition to end homelessness by 2040.
I work for Crisis because it's all about solutions. We can be positive about homelessness. We can totally solve this problem. We see it every day with our members. We see it when good policy drives the numbers down, so we need to finish the job.
Ending homelessness by 2040 requires political will. It takes commitment to doing it. It's not going to be an easy or fast fix, but it's worth doing, and it's worth doing over the long term. We're voting to end homelessness by 2040. Will you join us?